The veteran had just handed over the cash for the used car when the dealer suddenly stood up, staring at him in shock. He had simply walked in. Worn-out jacket, dusty shoes, a hardened face, but calm eyes. An old man stood at the entrance of a used car dealership, eyeing the rows of vehicles as if he were searching for something deeper than just polished metal. No one recognized him. Inside the brightly lit showroom, filled with the scent of floor cleaner, the staff were busy chatting with younger, cleaner, and more promising customers. But the old man strolled in slowly, weaving between the rows of cars, and stopped in front of a sleek black sedan. One of the salesmen, a young man named Eric, glanced over from behind his desk. "Look at that guy. Lost, probably," he muttered with a smirk to the co-worker beside him. The veteran inspected the car closely. His hand brushed over body like someone touching a memory. He didn't look at brochures or price tags, but his eyes were full of judgment. Eric, still chewing gum lazily, finally stood up and approached with disinterest. "Can I help you, sir? If you're looking for something under $5,000, it's over there," he said, half laughing. The veteran didn't respond right away. He simply stared at Eric for a moment, then calmly said, "I'd like to test drive this one." Eric almost laughed out loud. The car in question was one of the showroom's best units, a German sports sedan, only a few years old. Previously owned by a corporate executive, recently marked down because of a barely visible scratch on the rear door. "Sir, this car isn't for rent," Eric replied, half mocking. But the old man stayed composed. "I'm serious." Something in his voice made Eric pause. It was soft but firm, calm, yet heavy with something unspoken. With a glance toward the glass office, Eric saw the manager shrug indifferently. Eric reluctantly handed him the keys. "Don't take too long, okay?" Without a word, the veteran stepped into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life. The car rolled forward, steady, smooth, and full of purpose. Eric returned inside, shaking his head. "If he runs off, who's paying for that?" he joked. "Relax. He'll be back in 5 minutes." "No way he's buying," another staffer replied. They chuckled among themselves. But one intern named Nina had been watching the old man closely, curiosity on her face. "He drives like he already knows the car," she whispered. Outside the showroom, the car stopped briefly by the roadside. The veteran stared into the distance. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His eyes held something back. Then he drove again, slower, like a man on his way home, not to a place, but to a moment long gone. 27 minutes later, the black sedan returned. The car stopped precisely where it had started. No screeching tires. No drama. Just silence. The veteran stepped out, gently closed the door, and walked back inside, holding something in his hand. Eric raised an eyebrow when he saw him again. "No dents? Good," he muttered, trying to sound amused. But the veteran didn't react. He walked straight toward the main desk and stood in front of it. In his hand was a thin, crumpled plastic bag. Eric watched, puzzled. The old man reached inside and slowly pulled out a thick bundle of cash, wrapped neatly in rubber bands, organized by denomination. He set it down on the desk without a word. Eric blinked. The room went quiet. Even the manager, who had been sipping coffee from inside his office, looked up and slowly stepped out. "What's this?" Eric finally asked. "For the car," the veteran said calmly. "Full price. No financing. No trade-in." Eric looked at the money, then at the man, then back at the money. "You're paying in cash?" he asked in disbelief. The veteran nodded. "Is that a problem?" No, not at all. It's just," Eric stuttered, unsure what to say next. By then, the manager had walked over, eyebrows furrowed. "I'll need to verify some documentation, sir. Do you have an ID?" The veteran reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and handed over a card. The manager glanced at it casually, but then stopped. His eyes narrowed. He brought the card closer to his face. His expression changed. "This is," he muttered, then looked up. "Sir, would you mind waiting a moment?" The veteran nodded once. Without another word, the manager turned and walked briskly into his office, holding the card tightly. He closed the door behind him. Inside the office, he sat down, opened his laptop, and typed in the name on the military ID. Seconds passed. Then he leaned forward. His eyes scanned the screen. Suddenly, he froze. Outside the glass walls, the veteran stood silently, his hands folded behind his back. Calm, still, like a statue carved from time. The sales team began whispering. Who pays for a car in cash these days? Did he rob a bank or something? No way, he's just some random old man. Only Nina stayed quiet. Something about the way he carried himself, his composure, the way he looked at the car, the way he didn't flinch at the price. None of it felt ordinary. Then, from inside the office, the manager stood up suddenly. He didn't say a word, but his face had changed. His hands were slightly trembling, and he was walking toward the veteran again with a look that none of them had ever seen before. The manager's footsteps echoed through the showroom. Slow but firm, a place usually filled with casual chatter, had fallen into a deep silence. Even the low hum of the air conditioner felt louder than usual. The veteran stood still. He didn't ask a question. He didn't move, as if he already knew what was coming. The manager stopped in front of him. Seconds passed. No words. Then, in a quiet, controlled voice, the manager spoke. Sir, I'm going to ask the staff to gather for a moment. Is that all right? The veteran nodded once. The manager turned around and spoke up. Everyone, please come here for a minute. I want you all to hear something. The staff looked at each other, confused, but obeyed. Eric leaned over to Nina and whispered, What is this? What's going on? Nina furrowed her brow and said nothing. The manager stood in front of them, still holding the veteran's ID card. He lifted the card slightly and said, his voice trembling, Do any of you know who this is? No one answered. This man's name is Colonel Emmett Bradford. A few employees squinted, trying to recall the name, but most just looked around, clueless. The manager continued. Kandahar, 2010, Bravo 12 unit. Ambushed for 7 hours. Nearly wiped out. But one man led the evacuation. Unarmed. Injured. He carried out 32 soldiers by himself. The room grew heavier. This story spread throughout the military, but he refused publicity. He never gave interviews. His face was never shown in the news. That's why you don't recognize him. He paused. But he's standing right here in front of you, buying a car, and you laughed at him. Silence. Eric stared at the ground. Nina's lips parted slightly, her eyes wide. Then the manager did something no one expected. He turned toward the veteran, stood at attention, and saluted. A formal, clean military salute. The veteran returned the gesture, not sharply, not proudly, but with the quiet weight of someone who had carried more than medals. Nina covered her mouth. Her eyes welled up. She finally understood who had been standing in their showroom. In the corner, one of the junior salesmen who had mocked him earlier pinched his arm, as if trying to wake himself from a strange dream. The veteran still didn't say a word, but the way he stood, the way he looked around the room, spoke louder than anything they could say. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the car. It was about a man who had stared down death without flinching. And today, all he wanted was to buy a car. After the salute, a stillness lingered. No one moved. No one dared to speak. All eyes remained on the veteran. This quiet storm of man, standing among them like a monument they had never noticed before. The manager cleared his throat, trying to gather himself. Sir, he said, voice steadier now. On behalf of this dealership, I'd like to sincerely apologize for how you were treated. The veteran remained quiet. The manager took a deep breath, then turned to Eric. Get the keys to the executive service room. Eric, still pale, nodded and quickly disappeared into the back. Moments later, he returned with a different set of keys, sleek black, and marked with gold lettering. The manager held them out to the veteran. This is the upgraded version of the model you test drove. Same make, same year, but it's top trim, fully loaded. We want you to have it at no additional charge. The staff's jaws dropped. Eric whispered to Nina, that car's worth 10 grand more. But Nina just stared at the veteran, who hadn't even flinched. The veteran looked at the keys, then at the manager. "I don't need upgrades," he said flatly. "I already paid for the one I want." The manager shook his head. "Please, sir, it's not about charity. It's about respect." He hesitated, then added, "And we'd like to offer lifetime servicing for your vehicle. Free of charge. No questions asked." Still, the veteran said nothing. Instead, he slowly reached out, took the keys, and tucked them into his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he said simply. Then, as if the moment had passed, he turned around and began walking back toward the exit. No pride, no drama, just footsteps, steady and measured. As he passed the main door, he paused for a moment and looked back, not at the manager, not at the car, but at Nina. Their eyes met, and with a small nod, he acknowledged something in her gaze. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. Then he walked out, leaving a silence that no one dared to fill. Behind him, the dealership buzzed, not with gossip, but with something heavier: reverence, shame, and awe. For the rest of the day, no one made jokes. No one sneered at walk-ins, and the black upgraded sedan sat parked out front, waiting for its owner, who had reminded them all of something far more valuable than cars: honor. It wasn't until the veteran had been gone for over an hour that Nina noticed the envelope. She was organizing brochures near the reception desk when she spotted something slip between the seat cushions of the customer lounge chair, the chair where the veteran had briefly sat while the manager verified his ID. It was a plain envelope, no markings, just her name handwritten across the front in careful, deliberate strokes. She looked around. No one else seemed to notice. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and something heavy wrapped in tissue. The note read, "To the only one who looked at me without judgment. You remind me of someone I once knew, in a place far from here." She didn't laugh either. "Keep listening. That alone can save more people than you think." Nina's hands trembled slightly. She unwrapped the tissue and gasped. It was a medal, not a generic token or souvenir, but a real military honor. A bronze star, polished and pristine. She looked up, eyes wide, heart racing. Why would he leave something like this? Why her? She clutched the medal tightly, as if holding something sacred. Just then, the manager walked by and saw her expression. "What's that?" he asked gently. Nina held up the medal wordlessly. The manager's face paled. "He left that for you?" She nodded, and suddenly, the meaning behind everything clicked. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a message that even in a room full of mockery, someone had seen him. Someone had made him feel human, not judged, and in return, he gave her a symbol of everything he had carried: pain, service, memory, and trust. The dealership would never be the same. Nina placed the medal gently inside the glass display case near the front door. Not for vanity, not for show, but to remind everyone who walked in that they had been visited by someone greater than status or wealth, and that in the silence he left behind, there was something louder than applause. A legacy. 2 days passed. The upgraded sedan remained parked at the front of the showroom, just as the veteran had left it. Cleaned, tuned. A red ribbon was even tied to the side mirror by one of the newer staffers, hoping to make it feel more like a gift. But the veteran didn't return. No phone calls. No follow-up. No paperwork. It was as if he had vanished. Eric grew restless. "He's not coming back," he muttered. Maybe he didn't want it after all. Maybe he just wanted to prove a point. Nina said nothing, but inside, she felt differently. She kept glancing at the front door, as if it might open at any moment. By the 3rd day, the dealership resumed its usual rhythm, but it felt different now. No more snickering at customers with dusty shoes. No more dismissing walk-ins. Even the music in the background had changed. Now quiet jazz, more respectful somehow. That afternoon, a plain white envelope arrived by courier. The receptionist brought it in, confused. "There's no return address." The manager opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter, handwritten, and taped to the bottom was the original key fob for the first car, the one the veteran had test-driven, the one he paid for, The letter read, "The car was never the point. I only wanted to remember how it felt to choose something again. Give the car to someone who truly needs it. Someone overlooked, like I was, and let them drive away with dignity. E.B." The manager sat back in his chair, speechless. He passed the letter around the staff. When Nina read it, her eyes filled with tears again. The medal he left her had not been an accident. It was a part of a larger message. The car he bought with cash, he didn't keep. The upgrade he was offered, he didn't accept. He took nothing and left behind something no one could replace. Honor, reflection, and a challenge to do better. The manager stood up. "All right," he said quietly. "We're going to find someone who needs this car, and we're going to give it to them, exactly the way he asked." No one disagreed. In that moment, the dealership that once judged by shoes and jackets became something else entirely. A place where one quiet man had turned steel and glass into something sacred. 1 week after the letter arrived, the upgraded sedan was still waiting in the front lot, untouched, untaken, and polished daily like a symbol of unspoken promise. The dealership staff had begun discussing potential candidates. But every time someone made a suggestion, a loyal customer, a friend, a neighbor, it never quite felt right. None of them matched what the veteran had described. Someone overlooked. Someone like he was. Until one rainy Thursday afternoon, a man entered the showroom, dripping wet, leaning on a cracked wooden cane. His clothes were clean but tattered, and his eyes carried the same quiet storm that once walked in weeks ago. The staff glanced at him, instinctively hesitating for a moment, then caught themselves. Eric stood up first. "Can I help you, sir?" The man looked down, uncomfortable. "I was just trying to stay dry," he mumbled. "I'm walking to the shelter 3 blocks down. Didn't know it was going to rain." Nina stepped forward, offering him a towel. "Take your time," she said gently. He smiled, shy and grateful. They offered him coffee, and he sat in the waiting area, unsure why he felt so welcomed. The manager, having watched silently from his office, came out and sat across from the man. "What's your name?" he asked. "David," the man replied. "David North." "Where you headed?" "I've been staying at the shelter since January," he said, pausing. "Things went downhill fast after my wife passed. I used to do deliveries, but can't stand long now. Hard to find steady work." There it was. The pause. The silence. The same kind of presence the veteran had. The manager looked over at Nina, then at the sedan outside. He made a quiet decision. "Mr. North," he said, "do you have a driver's license?" David blinked, confused. Yeah, still valid." "Why?" The manager nodded. "Come with me." They walked together to the front of the dealership. The rain had eased into a mist. The black upgraded sedan sat waiting, sleek and dry under the awning. The manager handed him the keys. "This car is yours." David stared, mouth slightly open. "What? I don't understand." Nina stepped forward and gently placed the envelope in his hand. Inside was a copy of the veteran's letter. She said softly, "This was his wish. He paid for this. He asked us to give it to someone who needed a second chance." David opened the envelope, read slowly. Then tears rolled down his cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," the manager replied. "Just take it and drive forward." David placed his cracked cane in the back seat. He sat behind the wheel, still shaking. And as the engine came to life, a small crowd of employees stood in the rain and watched quietly. He drove away, not in a car, but in a moment built by the grace of a stranger. Word spread quickly, not just about the free car, but about why it was given, about the letter, about the veteran. Customers who once bargained hard now walked in asking about the colonel. Salesmen who used to ignore quiet voices now leaned in to hear them better. And the dealership, once focused on quotas, started to feel like a different place entirely. They framed the original letter and hung it near the service counter. Below it, the bronze star that Nina had tried to keep hidden. Next to both, a photo of David North, the man who drove away in a black sedan, holding back tears behind the steering wheel. People stopped in just to read the story. Some didn't even shop for cars. They just stood there, quietly moved. But Nina noticed something else. Every few days, flowers appear at the edge of the parking lot, not on the curb, not in the planters, just tucked under the oak tree near the front sidewalk, where the veteran had first stood when he arrived. No note, no vase, just a small bouquet. Sometimes wildflowers, sometimes roses, always fresh. Eric joked, must be a neighbor with a soft heart. But Nina wasn't so sure. One evening, just as the sky dimmed into gold, she stepped outside with a cup of coffee. She walked to the oak tree, and as the breeze passed by, she looked down, a new bouquet, and next to it, a folded napkin. She picked it up hesitantly, unfolded it. On it, scrawled in that same deliberate handwriting, sometimes the best way to be remembered is to be forgotten for the right reason. Nina stood there, heart pounding. She looked toward the horizon. Empty road, no footsteps, no cars, just wind and fading light. She held the napkin to her chest, eyes misted. Whoever he was, wherever he went, he wasn't done. His presence lingered, not in speeches, not in headlines, but in small gestures passed hand to hand, like light moving quietly through cracks in the wall. 2 weeks later, the dealership was back in rhythm, at least on the surface. New cars came in. Customers walked out with keys. But beneath the routine, something subtle had changed. The staff listened more, smiled longer. There was more silence in their days, and somehow it felt fuller. Then the phone rang. It was a Wednesday morning. The front desk picked up first, expecting a routine inquiry. But the voice on the other end wasn't looking to buy a car. It was calm, deep, slightly raspy, like a man who didn't speak more than necessary. "May I speak to Nina?" The receptionist looked up and handed the phone to her. Nina answered, "Hello, this is Nina." A pause. Then the voice said, "You placed a medal in a glass case." Nina froze. The showroom kept moving around her, unaware that time had just stopped on her end of the line. She swallowed. "Yes," she replied. "I thought people should see it." Another pause. "That medal doesn't belong to me." She blinked. "But it was yours." "It belonged to all of them, the ones who didn't come home. I just wore it for them." Nina felt her throat tighten. Then maybe that's why people need to see it. There was a long, quiet breath on the other end. "You were the only one who saw me that day. I wanted you to know I saw you too." She closed her eyes. The background noise faded away. I wish I could thank you properly," she whispered. "You just did." A click. The line went dead. She held the receiver to her ear for several seconds, hoping somehow it would speak again. But it didn't. She slowly lowered it, then walked toward the glass display at the front of the room. The medal sat there, glowing under the morning light. Below it, she carefully placed a new note, handwritten in her own lettering, in honor of those who were never named, and the man who remembered all of them. As she stepped back, the manager walked over, having watched from a distance. "Was that him?" he asked softly. Nina nodded, but she said nothing else. Some things didn't need to be explained. Months passed. The dealership kept growing. Sales increased. But more importantly, so did the way people treated one another. Veterans began visiting more often, not to buy cars, but to sit, to talk, to share stories with Nina, who now kept a small logbook behind the counter filled with handwritten notes from every soldier who came through. Some of them cried. Some just nodded and said he would have liked to hear. The black upgraded sedan, the one gifted to David North, was occasionally seen parked nearby. He always stopped in for routine maintenance, even though it was offered for free. He always tried to pay. They always refused. One December morning, the staff found a package on the steps before opening. No courier, no tracks in the frost, just a simple brown box wrapped in twine. Inside, they found a small wooden plaque, burned into its surface, etched by hand. Respect is earned. Kindness is a choice. But dignity must be protected. There was no name, no note, no explanation. But no one asked. They hung the plaque above the entryway, where every single person who walked in would see it before speaking their first word. And beside the glass window, just under the oak tree where the veteran had once stood, they placed a single empty chair. It wasn't marked. It wasn't mentioned in brochures. But every employee knew that chair wasn't for customers. It was his. And on some quiet mornings, when the wind moved just right, when the light hit the showroom floor in a familiar shade of gold, they swore they could hear footsteps pause at the door, as if he'd returned. Not for recognition, not for reward, just to make sure they hadn't forgotten what he gave them. Not a car, not a medal, but something far rarer. A mirror to see themselves better than they were, and a silent challenge to stay that way